This is Boston in 1760. But if you walked these streets, you wouldn't recognize a single thing. The buildings? Gone. The shoreline? Completely different. Even the ground beneath your feet has been filled in and rebuilt. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you a city that vanished and the revolution that was born here. Using AI, I've brought colonial Boston back to life. Not just pictures in a textbook, but moving scenes where you can walk these streets, see the faces, and witness the moments that changed everything. But before we step back in time, I need your help with something. My mother told me I'd never reach 1,000 subscribers doing this. She said nobody cares about old stories anymore. But I believe these stories deserve to be heard. If you're listening right now and you think tales like this matter, hit that subscribe button and help me prove her wrong. Let's show her that history isn't just worth remembering, it's worth sharing. Now, let's step back in time, and at the end, we'll compare these exact locations to today, because some of what happened here is still hiding in plain sight. June 1630. The Winthrop fleet drops anchor off an unknown coastline. These aren't explorers or adventurers, they're families gambling everything on a new world. John Winthrop leads them, but nobody knows if this will work. Imagine stepping off that ship onto empty land, knowing there's no going back. Everything you build starts right here, right now. 2 years later, they've built this, Boston's first meeting house, constructed in 1632 near what's now State Street. Simple, wooden, practical. This is where the town gathered to make decisions, settle disputes, and pray together. It's not grand, but it's theirs. Standing here, you'd have no idea that within 150 years, this quiet settlement would ignite a revolution that would shake an empire. This is Boston in its earliest days. Muddy roads, modest wooden structures, ships anchored close to shore. Life moves slowly here, fragile and uncertain. Look around. There's nothing suggesting this place will matter. No grand architecture, no wealth, just people trying to survive in a world they're still figuring out. But something is starting, something that will define not just this city, but an entire nation's identity. Fast forward to the 1720s, Boston has transformed. The harbor is packed with ships connecting this port to Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. Trade flows through here, money flows through here, and with it comes power. This isn't a struggling settlement anymore. This is a city that matters. See this? Long Wharf. Built in 1710, it stretches nearly 2,000 feet into the harbor, one of the longest piers in North America. When ships arrive from London or the West Indies, this is where they dock. Cargo gets unloaded. Passengers step onto American soil for the first time. News from across the Atlantic arrives here first. If you want to understand Boston's power, stand on this wharf and watch the world flow past you. Behind the waterfront, church steeples mark Boston's neighborhoods. That one? Christ Church, built in 1723. You know it today as Old North Church, but right now it's just a parish church in the North End. Nobody standing here knows that in 50 years, a simple signal from that tower will help start a war. Out in the harbor, there's Boston Light. Completed in 1716, it's the first lighthouse built in what will become the United States. For sailors crossing the Atlantic after weeks or months at sea, this light is the first sign that the journey is ending. Imagine that moment, the relief, the hope, the promise that whatever you're looking for might actually be waiting on the other side of that harbor. But Boston isn't just opportunity, it's also control. This is Castle William, guarding the harbor entrance on Castle Island. British cannons, British soldiers, British authority. Every ship that enters this harbor passes under these guns. This fort is a reminder. Boston might feel like home, but someone else is in charge.
Across the river in Cambridge sits Harvard College. Founded in 1636 to train clergy and colonial leaders, it's small but growing. These three buildings define the campus. On the left, Harvard Hall for classes, center, Stoughton Hall for student housing, and on the right, Massachusetts Hall, built in 1720. That one still stands today, Harvard's oldest surviving building. Looking at this quiet campus, you'd never guess what's coming. Some of the minds that will shape the revolution are being formed right here, in these modest buildings, preparing to challenge everything their teachers taught them about loyalty and power. This is the old State House, the center of colonial government. Laws are debated here. Taxes are imposed here. Royal proclamations are read from this balcony to crowds gathered below. This building represents British authority in Massachusetts. Everything the Crown decides flows through this place. But authority only works when people accept it, and in Boston, that acceptance is starting to crack. Boston Common, open grazing land where animals feed, families walk, and British soldiers drill. See them there? Redcoats marching in formation while townspeople go about their lives. It looks normal, peaceful even, but the presence of those soldiers is a constant reminder of whose rules apply here. Standing on this common in 1768, you might not feel the tension yet. Kids are playing, people are talking, soldiers are training, just another ordinary day. You have no idea that within 2 years, violence will erupt just steps from here, and 5 men will die in the street. March 5th, 1770. Right here, in front of the old State House, a crowd confronts British soldiers, shouting, pushing, throwing ice and rocks. The soldiers are outnumbered, nervous, and someone makes a decision that changes everything. They fire. 5 men fall. Crispus Attucks, a sailor of African and Native American descent, becomes the first casualty of what will become the American Revolution. This isn't a battle. It's a street fight that spirals out of control. But colonial leaders like Samuel Adams immediately call it a massacre and use it to fuel anti-British sentiment across all 13 colonies. Today, a simple circle of cobblestones marks this spot. Thousands walk over it daily without knowing they're standing where the revolution truly began. This modest wooden house in the North End belongs to Paul Revere, a silversmith. Built around 1680, it's already old by the 1770s. Small rooms, practical design, nothing special. But on the night of April 18, 1775, Revere leaves from this house on a ride that will become legend. His mission? Warn colonial militias that British troops are marching toward Lexington and Concord. He's not alone. There are other riders, other messengers, but his journey becomes the symbol of American readiness. One man, one horse, one warning that spreads through the countryside and turns a British military operation into the opening shots of a revolution. And here's where that warning begins. Old North Church, the signal everyone knows. 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. On the night of April 18th, the church sexton, Robert Newman, climbs this tower and hangs 2 lanterns. The message? British troops are crossing the water, not marching by road. It's a brief signal, visible for just moments, but it sets everything in motion. By the next morning, colonial militiamen will face British regulars on Lexington Green, and the Revolutionary War will begin. Nothing about this church suggested it would play this role. It was just part of the neighborhood, woven into everyday life. And then, history chose it. Before Lexington, before the midnight ride, there was this moment. Old South Meeting House, December 16, 1773.
Thousands of colonists pack this building, debating what to do about the tea ships sitting in the harbor. Britain has imposed a tax. Boston refuses to pay. The ships can't unload, and they can't leave. After hours of heated argument, Samuel Adams gives what many interpret as a signal. The crowd, some disguised as Mohawk Indians, pours out of this hall and marches straight to the waterfront. This is what happens next. They board the ships, smash open 342 chests, and dump 92,000 pounds of tea into Boston Harbor. It takes hours, it's organized, deliberate, and it sends an unmistakable message: we will not comply. At the time, nobody calls it the Boston Tea Party. It's just an act of defiance carried out in the cold December darkness. But Britain's response is swift and severe. They close Boston Harbor, send more troops, impose martial law, and in trying to punish Boston, they unite the colonies against them. By 1775, this building has become the center of resistance. Faneuil Hall, a market on the ground floor, and above it, a hall where Bostonians gather to debate, protest, and organize. They pack this room shoulder to shoulder, arguing over taxes, representation, and British authority. This is where speeches turn frustration into action, where private anger becomes public resistance, where the idea of independence moves from whispered conversations to open defiance. The building is less a landmark and more a pressure point where a city wrestles with what it's about to become. 14 years after the revolution begins, this happens. A triumphal arch erected in Boston to welcome George Washington as president of a newly independent nation. Built of wood but finished to look like stone, giving it the illusion of permanence at a moment when the nation itself is still uncertain. Just years earlier, these same streets were filled with protest, violence, and British troops. Now they're dressed for celebration. For the people standing here, this moment is proof. The revolution worked. The colonies aren't fighting to become something anymore. They are something. Imagine being there, watching the city step into history, no longer part of an empire, but part of something entirely new. Now, let's see what's left. Boston's first meeting house once stood here on State Street. Today, one of the busiest streets in the city, with no trace of where the town first gathered. The 1720s harbor, crowded and low to the water. Today, that shoreline has been filled in and built up into a modern skyline, but the harbor is still Boston's heart. The original Boston Light was destroyed by the British in 1776. What stands there today is a rebuild from 1783, still guiding ships, still standing after more than 2 centuries. The old State House, nearly unchanged, but now surrounded by modern towers, one of the few places where Boston's revolutionary past still stands exactly where it happened. Boston Common, once open grazing land at the edge of a small town, today still the city's oldest public park, now surrounded by the modern city that grew up around it. The Boston Massacre site marked with a circle of cobblestones in the street. Thousands walk over it daily, most without realizing they're standing where the first blood of the revolution was shed. The Paul Revere House still stands on North Square, Boston's oldest building, now a museum where you can walk through the same rooms where Revere lived and from which he departed on his famous ride. And Old North Church still rises above the North End, watching over the same streets where history first unfolded. You can climb the tower stairs and see where the lanterns were hung, connecting directly to that April night in 1775. Boston today looks nothing like the city that sparked a revolution, but if you know where to look, pieces of that world are still here, still standing, still telling the story of how a crowded port town became the birthplace of a nation. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more cities brought back to life, let me know in the comments which one I should reconstruct next, and if you haven't already, subscribe. Let's prove that these stories matter.